It's Tim Sheeser for TechSpot, and this is the Toshiba Encore, the company's first attempt at an 8-inch Windows 8.1 tablet. It comes with an 8.0-inch LCD display at 1280 by 800, as well as Intel's Bay Trail Atom Z3740 SoC, alongside 2GB of RAM and up to 64GB of internal storage. There's also a 19.5 watt-hour battery, an 8-megapixel rear camera, and it comes running out of the box with full Windows 8.1. Before we head into the review, if you want to check out the Encore's main points in a short 2-minute video, you can do so by clicking here to the 2-minute video review. And also, if you want to check out all the accessories and cool other things that Toshiba sent me along with the Encore, you can check out the unboxing video right here. The design of the Toshiba Encore is fairly uninspiring and quite drab as far as tablets go. I mean, there's not much you can really do to improve upon the standard 8-inch tablet design where everything is oriented in a portrait fashion. There are bezels around the edge that are quite considerable in size, and overall the device is quite chubby, coming in at around about 10.7mm thick, so they're not trying to break any records here. It's also 445 grams heavy, which is quite heavy as far as 8-inch tablets go. For some values just to compare it to, the iPad mini with Retina display is around about 300 grams, and the Lenovo Mix 2.8 that I've been reviewing recently is also around that 350 gram mark. So it is a fairly heavy tablet in terms of its weight. In fact, it's getting right up there in sort of the ballpark of 10-inch tablets, which is not something that you're trying to look for in a very portable tablet. But that said, you know, it still fits quite reasonably in your hands. It's more portable than you'll find from a 10-inch tablet despite that sort of thickness and weight. The majority of the Encore's design is made from plastic, of course excluding the glass that you'll find protecting the display on the front. It's made out of this kind of interesting but still fairly cheap plastic as far as plastics go. It feels tough, but it doesn't feel particularly great in the hands. There's this interesting sort of square pattern that you'll find on the back, and overall the only color you can get is actually silver, which I guess is competing with the iPad mini and other metal type tablets. But the thing is that the feel and look of this tablet just doesn't look as good as those metal tablets. It's trying, I believe, to go for a sort of metal look, but it doesn't quite get there with sort of what it's achieving. It just looks a bit dull and uninteresting when you sort of take it out of the box for the first time. You also notice on the bottom here that we've got the Toshiba logo in quite a bare design. There's not really anything to talk about. On the back here we've got the 8-megapixel camera at the top, and there's also some stickers along the bottom telling you about the device, and of course a sticker designating that it's Intel inside. Looking around the device, and on the top you'll find both the power button and the volume rocker. These buttons feel kind of weak as far as you can sort of find from buttons. They sort of don't have that nice clicky feel. They just feel like they've sort of slapped on these plastic buttons, which isn't too great. On the top you'll also find the rest of the features of the Encore. You'll find right here we've got the micro USB charging port, so nothing proprietary, which is nice to see. We've also got a fairly handy mini HDMI port that allows you to attach to projectors or external displays with relative ease. There's no need for any MHL sort of connectors out through the USB port. Great for people who need to sort of connect to projectors and stuff on the fly. We also have the 3.5mm headphone jack on the top for all your audio out. And if we flick the tablet around to the bottom, we'll find two downwards firing sort of speakers there. Sort of when you're holding it in a portrait mode, it tends to blare the sound out from the bottom there, which is fairly reasonable, but sort of when I'm holding it in portrait mode, I kind of like to have my speakers on each side of the tablet, so that's a little bit of a downside there. Towards the bottom of the Encore you can find both the Toshiba branding as well as the capacitive Windows button. You can actually tap the capacitive button to turn on the display, which is kind of handy if you can't reach the power button towards the top. And on the top of the display up here you'll find the front-facing 2-megapixel camera as well as some cleverly hidden sensors, which is kind of nice to see, powering auto brightness and things like that. The display on the Toshiba Encore is an 8.0-inch HFFS LCD panel with a resolution of 1280 by 800, coming in at a pixel density of around about 189 pixels per inch, which is a little bit disappointing compared to some of the devices that we can find on the market today. The Amazon Kindle Fire HD comes to mind, which actually has an 8.9-inch panel at 1080p, and that device is actually cheaper than the Toshiba Encore. And there's also the LG G Pad 8.3, again with a 1080p panel. So we can sort of see that the 1280 by 800 resolution of this display is quite disappointing, but we'll take a look at text a little bit later on in this review. First, we'll take a look at, of course, the color quality that you can see from this picture that I've got on the display here. As I mentioned a little earlier, the display technology used in the Encore is HFFS, which stands for High Transmittance Fringe Field Switching, and it's quite similar to IPS that we see in a lot of other tablets, of course IPS standing for in-plane switching. One of the main advantages to having an HFFS panel are the viewing angles, which in fact are some of the best viewing angles that you'll find on any type panel. IPS does come pretty close, but it doesn't compare to the fact that when you sort of tilt the HFFS panel, you'll notice that the colors don't really shift whatsoever, and that is great to see, of course, from this panel. In fact, there's quite a considerable gap in between the protective glass and the panel itself, which generally speaking reduce viewing angles, but on this panel it's still really good. You can view this panel really from all angles. Not sure it's coming through on the camera, but in real life, even when you're sort of viewing it like this, you can still see the panel quite reasonably. While this panel does have the advantage of great viewing angles, it doesn't seem to be able to match IPS panels in terms of its color quality. Colors just don't look as saturated as you'll find from sort of competing IPS displays. And contrast, while it's good, is not as good as I've seen on some other panels, and there is some backlight bleed you'll notice when looking at fairly dark images. Brightness, that said, is quite good. You're sort of looking at light images such as this one, and it does look reasonably good, but again not quite as good as you'll find from an IPS display. Coming back to the resolution of the panel, and the area where you'll most notice the deficit here is when looking at text. In fact, it's quite easy to spot individual pixels on this panel when sort of looking up close, and the edges of text just don't look as sharp as you'll find on, say, a 1080p panel or the Retina iPad mini, both of which, you know, produce fantastic looking text that is crisp. You're just not going to get this on the 1280 by 800 resolution here. That said, it's of course still usable. Of course, we're not talking about VGA or any terrible resolutions like that, but it's not as good as you'll find on similarly priced tablets. And that's one of the main problems with 8-inch tablets from Windows OEMs, that they're not actually using high resolution panels that we're used to on some of the more media focused Android or iOS devices. In terms of the performance on the Toshiba Encore, we're looking at an Intel Bay Trail Atom Z3740 SoC, which comes with a 1.33 GHz quad-core CPU as well as Intel's HD graphics GPU. There's also 2 GB of RAM in this device, as well as 64 GB of storage in this particular model. There's also a 32 GB model available, and that is expandable through the microSD card slot that you can find on the left-hand side of the device. Intel's Bay Trail SoC compares quite favorably to some of the high-power ARM SoCs that we've used to in smartphones and tablets in the past, such as the Apple A7 chip as well as Qualcomm Snapdragon 800. You know, things such as loading applications, even if we've loaded them before, is quite speedy. You know, browsing around the operating system, manipulating web pages and stuff like that, you know, everything is extremely fast. You know, straight back to the Windows operating system. Again, everything here you'll notice is hardware accelerated. We jump into apps and stuff like that. Everything is extremely fast to use and is very comparable to your sort of high power ARM SoC. Sometimes you can notice a slight delay in opening applications that you haven't opened before. You can notice these sort of splash screens here that come up briefly, but even that said, everything is quite fast, and there are some limitations with splash screens in Windows itself, but everything seems quite fast from that Bay Trail SoC. You can check out benchmarks for this device, and compared to other tablets, you'll find that in the full written review. Links to that will be found below. But we're not just limited to the Metro interface on the Toshiba Encore. Of course, this is an x86 tablet, so we get the full Windows desktop as well, for better or worse. Now, performance in some things such as Google Chrome, which is a desktop browser, is quite good on the device, but it's not really suitable for things such as Photoshop and other professional tools. We'll find that the Bay Trail Atom processor is simply too slow compared to something like Haswell. Of course, the desktop isn't particularly easy to use with sort of just fingers. For example, everything is actually quite small on the desktop interface on an 8-inch tablet. Notice items down the side here can be quite hard to hit, and things such as opening up the sort of notification tray here, not too friendly unless you're using a keyboard and mouse. But that said, it does give you the option to use, you know, Steam and other things such as that for better or worse. Although generally in my use of the Toshiba Encore, I didn't really find myself going into the desktop all that much, so it really shouldn't be too much of a concern. There's a few other applications loaded onto the Toshiba Encore. You'll find a full copy of Office 2013, as well as Norton Security, which is fairly annoying, especially when the trial runs out. There is a Rara Music with Toshiba, a music app that I don't really understand why is on the tablet when you also have the Xbox Music app, and a nifty little app called True Capture, which is actually a camera application. If you're trying to take a photo of, say, a document, this application will do the best job at making the text readable, which is great to see. Speaking of the camera, the 8 megapixel sensor on the back of this tablet is actually quite good. It's a Sony XML camera, which we've seen in the Galaxy S3, so while it is a little bit outdated, it does still take really good shots for a tablet. Not that you should be using a tablet for photography too often, but you can take some fairly decent shots out of this 8 megapixel camera. So at the end of the day, the Toshiba Encore is a fairly average 8-inch tablet. It does have the full capabilities of Windows 8.1, which is nice to see, as well as a fairly good camera and good performance from the Bay Trail Atom SoC. But the design itself is quite bland, there's nothing too exciting as far as that goes, and the display with its resolution of 1280 by 800 is fairly lackluster. What's more is that the value proposition of the Toshiba Encore isn't that great compared to other tablets running Windows 8.1. You'll find the Encore costs $329 for the 32GB model, but you can actually find devices such as the Dell Venue 8 Pro, which are fairly similar to the Toshiba Encore, for as low as $239. You can also pick up the Lenovo Mix 2 8 for around $299, or there is the Asus Vivo Tab Note 8, which has a Wacom digitizer for stylus support for the exact same price as the Toshiba Encore, so it's not that great in terms of value for money. Hope you guys have enjoyed this review of the Toshiba Encore. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more video reviews coming in the future. You can check out the full written review, links to that in the description below. If you want to ask me any questions about the Encore, feel free to do so on my Twitter at ScorpusV, and of course TechSpot is also on Twitter at TechSpot. Thanks guys, and this has been a TechSpot video review.